Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And we'll dive into something that is arguably as complicated as the conversation we had in the last hour, and somewhat embarrassingly for me, it involves another mea culpa, another example. Actually, is it embarrassing? I don't think it is embarrassing, actually. That's quite a very right-wing attitude. It's not embarrassing at all to sit here and say that, having had the privilege of listening to you for many, many years, I've changed my mind about quite a lot of things in the course of that time. And the relationship between anti-Semitism and the Labour Party, more pertinently, actually, historically, the relationship between anti-Semitism and the nation of Israel, the modern nation of Israel, is something that I've felt my thoughts and opinions shifting hugely over the years, culminating, actually, in finally understanding why people will... I choose my words very carefully here, but I hope you'll give me some room to breathe, some room to think. Why, historically, when I've been speaking to people about Israel, they have seemed to me to allow emotions to override reason, and I used to find that problematical. But now I have a much better grasp of how Holocausts happen. Now I've seen an American president essentially describe Nazis as very fine people. Now I know that I live in a society where fascism can take a hold. Now I understand why Jewish people won't really allow any criticism at all of Israel, even when their brains are telling them that on this occasion Israel probably shouldn't have done that thing that it did. I now get it. I think if I had lived my entire life in fear, on some level, and I'm not being melodramatic, on some level of fear of it happening again, on some level of the knock on the door, or some level of the slow creep towards being ordered to wear stars, culminating in being loaded onto trains, and knowing that it happened to your aunt or your grandma, knowing, Alf Dubs is an amazing man who I've had the privilege of speaking to at some length recently, and he of course was on the kinder transport, and I've told you this a few times, I used to think that it was almost like a different genre of history that didn't actually apply to human beings like us. These things couldn't be done by people like us. But then you look at some of the coverage of the Syrian refugee crisis, and you look at some of the responses on social media from people to the prospect of children drowning in the sea, and you suddenly realise that there aren't any rules. In America now, they're tearing children away from their parents and locking them in cages, and people people you're friends with on Facebook are perfectly cool with that. They like it, even. And Donald Trump knows this. He plays people like that quite perfectly. So I get it now, and I'm pretty sure that if I was Jewish and I had grown up in the shadow of the last Holocaust, I too would hold Israel in a way that defies logical analysis and speaks instead to a sense of preservation and survival. I'm getting that out there early, okay, because I've got something pretty grim to say about the Labour Party. I think I know why they're doing this. I think I know why the Labour Party are not lancing the boil of anti-Semitism that is clearly in their body politic. And I think I know why. And it's an insight that perhaps comes from what I do and how I do it, professionally speaking. You wrestle with these questions. Why? I mean, number one, left-wing people are historically supposed to defend minorities and be massively opposed to discrimination and oppression. So number one problem with Labour anti-Semitism is it does the polar opposite of what most of us who would describe ourselves as liberal or even occasionally left-leaning think that the Labour Party should do. So that means that this must be different from normal discrimination and racism, because it's something that people who claim to be enemies of discrimination and racism can be comfortable with. All right? The scandal today, or the story today, involves the National Executive of the Labour Party choosing to reject the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. This is the definition implemented in full by the government, the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, the Crown Prosecution Service and 124 local authorities. Labour has altered, or opted to alter, 4 specific examples given in the guidance, and this is what has provoked a backlash from MPs and Jewish leaders. And this plays into what I just said to you about what we traditionally expect a liberal party with a small l to do. They stand accused of treating anti-Semitism differently to other forms of racism. There are there is room for manoeuvre here, though, or at least room for debate. Because the 4 points featured in the original one includes the accusation that Jews are more loyal to Israel than their own country, that Israel's existence is a racist endeavour, accusing people of applying a double standard on Israel and comparing contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Those are the 4 points which the Labour definition of anti-Semitism doesn't include. I can see 3 out of 4 of those being stone-cold bad omissions. Applying a double standard on Israel, I think I just did that, actually, didn't I? I just said that if I was Jewish, my defence of Israel would be different from my defence as a British person of Britain, because I would see Israel as the place where I go if it starts happening again. Is that a double standard? I don't actually know. But here's the thing. I think that anti-Semitism is Jeremy Corbyn's fake news. I think it's what he uses to empower his followers to ignore much reporting of him and his policies that may be negative. And I've seen it from the perspective of where I'm sitting now, which means it could be wrong, and maybe you see it very differently. But you know me, right? Whether you sort of cheer along with me every day or whether you're one of those strange people that listens a lot more closely to the programme than anybody else because you hate it so much. They're my favourites. But the point is this, that you know that I am many things, but one thing I am not is some sort of Zionist shill who's in the pay of Baron Rothschild or George Soros. Actually, leave George Soros out of it, because the Brexit brain disease possibly has affected some people so much that they might have bought into that idea. But nobody who's listened to this programme over the years is going to be able to accuse me with a straight face of being corrupt, let alone being corrupt in thrall to some sort of international Zionist conspiracy. But from a particular brand of Jeremy Corbyn supporter, and again, I will stress, because I've worked out recently that you have to, I just said a particular brand of Jeremy Corbyn supporter. So if what I'm about to say doesn't apply to you, then I'm not talking about you, okay? I'm talking about a particular brand of Jeremy Corbyn supporter who try to undermine everything I say on any subject that may be critical of the dear leader by claiming that I'm somehow part of a pro-Israeli conspiracy, which loosely translates as a Zionist master plan. And that's anti-Semitic. But they can't see that it's anti-Semitic because they actually think that it's true. And Jeremy Corbyn allows them to continue thinking that it's true because it gives them what they need to not believe the news, which is exactly what Donald Trump has done for his followers. So although some of the parallels drawn between Donald Trump and Jeremy Corbyn are profoundly unfair, this is my start of a 10, and I don't think anyone else has punted this theory yet. So it is entirely box fresh, and it's entirely my own. So if it falls apart like a cheap suit, it's all on me. But I've tried to work out why anti-Semitism in the Labour Party isn't just excised with a scalpel and great fanfare. Chuck them all out. Anybody who suggests that Jews are somehow more loyal to Israel than they are to their own country, anyone who suggests that Israel's existence is racist, anyone who has compared contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis, just chuck them all out. Why don't they just do it? Why don't they just chuck them all out? Answer twofold. Number one, there's too many of them. And number two, this whole narrative of a Zionist conspiracy allows Jeremy Corbyn to tell his followers what news they can trust and what news they can't, what truth they can believe and what truth they can't. It's just like Donald Trump. Trusting InfoWars, who, of course, accuse the grieving parents of children murdered in the Sandy Hook massacre of being hoaxers and actors. Donald Trump trusts them, but he doesn't trust CNN. You see? Because if you are constructing a slightly cultish platform of leadership, which is very, very short on detail, very, very long on rhetoric and promises, then you kind of need to have a core support that hangs upon your every word and brooks no criticism. You can't do that with a free press. You can't have no brooking of criticism with a free press. Donald Trump understands this, which is why I refused to take a question from CNN the other day. I think Jeremy Corbyn understands it as well, which is why he empowers some of his following to call somebody like me a Zionist shill, to describe most of the newspapers, which are biased against Corbyn, but not because of Zionism Jews or Israel. They're biased against Jeremy Corbyn because he's left-wing, and they don't like the socialist element of his policies that would see some of the riches of the newspaper owners diminished. They're not biased against Jeremy Corbyn because they've got some sort of blind fealty to the state of Israel. But if he allows that balloon to fly, then it gives his core support, the peculiar brand of Corbyn supporter who genuinely believes he can do no wrong, even as he presides over the most appalling episode of opposition in the history of British politics. He can do no wrong. And how do you allow them to continue believing that black is white and night is day? Well, because the people telling you that night is night are Zionist shills. They're part of a Jewish conspiracy. Or a pro-Israel project that is blind to objective truth and dedicated solely to the promotion and the defence of Israel. That's it. Let's get the phone lines open. Be gentle with me, all right? If this one gets torn apart by 11:20, we'll have to find something else to talk about. 0345 6060 973. And if you are going to have a crack at my theory and explanation, you're probably going to have to provide a better one of your own, which would be, why do you think the Labour's National Executive Committee decided not to endorse and approve the definition of anti-Semitism, which has been internationally recognised by everyone from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance through to the Welsh Assembly and the Crown Prosecution Service? What's your explanation for why the Labour Party can't follow the rest of the country in this simple definition of what anti-Semitism is? My answer is because the notion of a Jewish conspiracy suits Jeremy Corbyn's aims rather well. It's a very uncomfortable observation. I hope, as I often say on the programme, that I'm wrong. But as I've examined the evidence, I've wrestled with it for ages. I've thought and thought and thought about this. I've made mistakes. I've gone down the wrong road. But if you need an answer to that question, you need an answer to it. Why? Why can't they do what the Crown Prosecution Service has done? Why can't they do what the Welsh Assembly has done? Why can't they do what the House of Commons has done? Why can't they do what the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has done? Why do the Labour Party have to be different on this? Answer: because they have to keep alive the idea that criticism of the dear leader is born of a corrupt and dishonest source. And that's where the idea of the Zionist conspiracy comes in. If you ban them from suggesting that the only reason they're writing bad things about Jeremy Corbyn is because he sticks up for Palestinian people, you ban them from suggesting that, you have to examine Jeremy Corbyn honestly and completely, and in those circumstances he will be found wanting. It's 11:16. It's a very particular perspective in that it's only mine at the moment, but as I try to work out why the Labour Party has apparently failed to properly address its problem with anti-Semitism, I've got two answers. The first is it doesn't believe these people who are the problem don't believe that they're anti-Semitic. They really do believe that the media is run by Jews and is dedicated to protecting Israel regardless of the truth. They genuinely believe that, so they don't think they're anti-Semitic. Do you see? And the reason I know that is because they get in contact with me quite often whenever I talk about Jeremy Corbyn. And the second reason is that if you have that Jewish conspiracy lie abroad, if it's in the bloodstream of a political movement, then that political movement gets to decide what it believes and what it doesn't believe. It doesn't have to apply an objective measure of truth or trust. It can just decide. So it can base, it's like Donald Trump saying fake news, CNN fake news. You can say LBC fake news because, you know, we're part of some Zionist conspiracy. It means you can ignore the truth and pretend that the truth is not the truth. The truth in this case being that Jeremy Corbyn is a profoundly ineffective leader of the opposition, albeit that it may well be the most attractive choice between the rock and the hard place that currently constitutes British parliamentary politics. 20 minutes after 11. Zanny is in Hendon. Zanny, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm a very nervous first-time caller there.
It's only me. It's only me.
It's only you, yes, thank you very much. I come from a background of strong Labour supporters. In the past, one of my great uncles was a Labour mayor of Hackney. Always been Labour. It's changed over the last few years. And the sadness is the belief that perhaps we think of Israel above Britain. Now, I'm an average mother of children, like everybody else. We love England. We love living here. We are.
You don't need to justify yourself to me. As I read that point, I think you're perfect. You are perfectly entitled to be more loyal to Israel, but I'm not. I'm not allowed to say that you are. If it's not true,
you're not allowed to say that it's true.
Well, that's reasonable.
The fact that we are beginning to now feel hang on a minute, do we still have a role in this country is what worries me as a parent
Yes.
and as a person. Where we are beginning to get where Labour is not signing up to this and saying that we have this, our belief that we would rush off to Israel and defend that before Britain.
Yes.
It's not true. We live here. We live a normal life. We pay our taxes. We do everything. Our children and us have always lived with a fear. We've lived with the fear of the Holocaust again, but we just get on with life. Our children go to school where we have guards on our gate. We go to our synagogue where we have guards, because there's always that fear that there are people still out there who do not want us here. And it's that fear that's getting worse, because if people like Jeremy Corbyn are perpetuating these things by not signing up to it, they are making it more fearful for us.
I get that. I mean, there'd be no, I don't think from either of us, no suggestion that Jeremy Corbyn deliberately does that, but you can see it as an inevitable consequence of the things that he does deliberately do. Let me move you somewhat arrogantly towards my theory, because I look at it and I think, why are people, and now I'm getting the emails and the tweets telling me that actually the NEC haven't rejected the definition, they've absorbed it into a code of conduct. So all it's starting now, all the kind of finagling and the pedantry. Bottom line is, they could have done what every other organisation that I've listed has done and accept accept it. They've chosen not to, and they can seek to justify it in whatever way they want. But the rabbis and Margaret Hodge last night are pretty clear on what has actually happened, but not on the why. My why is that it suits this particular political movement, by which I mean the rump of momentum. I don't mean the Labour Party. I don't mean everyone who likes Jeremy Corbyn. I don't even mean everyone that's in momentum. But this weird rump within the party that won't allow any criticism at all of Jeremy Corbyn. The idea that all the criticism is bogus because it comes from a Zionist-funded organisation is very helpful to them.
Yes, I think it's just that we are an easy scapegoat. We're a very quiet community. We don't go out of our way to push our life into other people's lives. So the fact that we do that, whereas other communities, they might be a bit more vocal on it, although we are being vocal, it's always in the background we're vocal. We try to be good citizens. We don't try to create issues. So it's an easy target. It's one that's always been there. It's deep-rooted in many people from
But
their
I'm all
young
about,
age.
you see, you're about the whats because you're living it, and I'm about the whys because I'm trying to understand it. And you've given us the what. The why of it is, it's not classic scapegoating, because to work out why you get targeted, to use your word, you have to work out what's in it for the person firing the arrows.
To the original people who started this thing about how Jews are, we are this Zionist conspiracy, we're always out for ourselves. It's generations on generations. If a child has been brought up with that, they are not going to change that perception. So we now have a strong core of people in their 40s, 50s who have had that from as their life, and it just doesn't change, because if they're not in a community that ever meets us, why should they ever change it?
Well, even if they do meet you, it's not you. They don't mean you, not you. You're not one of those Jews that's running the world. It's the other ones. It's the other ones. Yes.
That's right. If they never see us and they see us as we've all got the money, and I turn around to people and go, well, hang on a minute, I'm exactly like you. I've got to struggle with my bills and everything, and they don't.
Well, that's true of everybody. Let me just run something by you, because I have made no bones at all about comparing some of Donald Trump's recent enacted policies, particularly the one signed off by Jeff Sessions on April the 6th involving children being taken from their parents and locked in cages. I have compared that to Nazism.
Yes.
And if Israel did something similar, I would like to feel free to compare that to Nazism as well. So that's one area of the four principles where you can see why perhaps some people might argue that that's not reasonable. If I can compare America to Nazis, why can't I compare contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis?
I think, from my personal point of view, if Israel did that, then it would be justified to.
Yeah.
But some of the other things we do, I mean, it would always be said that this is our one-sided, that we see it one-sided. But when we have the issues that go between Gaza and the Palestinians and Israel, we don't often see the same stories. We don't see the other side. We don't see the babies that are injured in Israel. So the comparison is often
This is the ice is thinner on this one, isn't it?
Yeah.
The ice is a little thinner on this one, but it's
so that one. Yes, you could always say like America. That was exactly a very similar thing to what the Nazis did, tearing these children away from their parents, locking them up.
But it's a specific instance of behaviour, of political behaviour, as opposed to an ideology. And I mean, again, if I say something now, I might be falling into the double standard trap, because I would say it seems to me reasonable that the country whose population essentially was targeted by the Nazis should be slightly treated differently when it comes to Nazi comparisons and Nazi analogies. But then we've moved away from the objectivity and the consistency that we're supposed to be pursuing. Zanny, perfect first call. Thank you. Daniel's in Cheltenham. Couple of minutes, Daniel. Use them well.
Oh, hello. Well, I've got all the pressure. No, I don't agree with the previous caller. I'm a Spanish/Israeli citizen, and I do believe that double standards when judging Israel is another form of anti-Semitism. And you take, for instance, the General Assembly of the United Nations condemning Israel 22 occasions.
I just want to talk about the Labour Party today, if that's all right.
Okay, but it's okay, sure. But it does apply sort of the same reasoning to the Labour Party. The Labour Party condemns Israel in such an extreme way that it doesn't apply to countries that are obviously behaving in a much...
No, we're not doing... I've had the phone in a million times about why do you slag off Israel and not slag off Saudi Arabia, but we're not having that phone call today. What we're doing today is the National Executives Committee's decision to approve the party's new code of conduct, which changes some of the content of the definition of anti-Semitism that the rest of the country accepts. And I'm interested in why you think that is. I've been pretty clear on what question I was asking today, Daniel. I appreciate that any phone in that involves Israel gets an awful lot of people ringing in to answer questions I haven't asked, but I'm not in the mood for that today, with your permission.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I wanted to tell you my personal reason, and that what I believe is that the Labour Party is giving their public what they want, and when
except it's not, though, is it? Because I could vote Labour. Margaret Hodge is a Labour MP. She's disgusted by this. People are queuing up to condemn the Labour. So they're not giving the Labour Party what they want. They are, I think, giving a very small core support of Jeremy Corbyn what they want, which is a reason and an excuse, a tool they can employ to discredit media coverage. And what they do, very similar to what Donald Trump does, is say that's fake news, that can't be trusted. It's ugly, and I kind of don't know quite where it leads, but it can't lead anywhere good. Daniel, thank you. Next time we have a conversation about whether or not Israel is unfairly treated on the world stage, I will take the call that you rang in with, but as I've stressed, we're not having that conversation today. We're trying to work out why. The party that I grew up believing was... I mean, existentially opposed to discrimination and oppression, to racism and bigotry, has allowed such an ugly Achilles heel to develop on the issue of anti-Semitism. And my answer, which at the moment nobody has managed to... actually, no one's tried yet, to be fair, before I give myself a pat on the back. My answer is that it is their version of fake news. Here is an article, here is a comment, here is something critical of Jeremy Corbyn. Don't examine the substance of the criticism. Don't try and work out whether it's true or not. Discredit the source. And then if it's true, you can pretend that it isn't, because you've discredited the source. Which, oddly, to bring in a Nazi analogy, that's the Lügenpresse, isn't it? That's the lying press. It's 11:30. We are, I think, for the second time ever, looking at the Labour Party's anti-Semitism problem. The Conservative Party, for the record, has a huge Islamophobia problem at the moment, but you can talk about both of them. You have to get out of this mindset of thinking that every time you talk about Labour's anti-Semitism, you're ignoring Tory Islamophobia, and every time you talk about Tory Islamophobia, you're ignoring Labour anti-Semitism. We try to walk a middle course on this programme, but there is a different issue here, because at risk of offending all of my Conservative friends, I kind of associate racism with the right wing. I don't associate it historically with the left wing. I see the left wing, rightly or wrongly, as seeing themselves as enemies of bigotry and prejudice. So what's happened with this anti-Semitism story? Very simply, the Labour Leadership Committee, the National Executive, has elected not to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. IHRA being the drafters of the code that's been accepted by the Welsh Assembly, by the British Parliament, the English Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, the CPS. I mean, everyone has accepted it. So why haven't they? Answer, if you are a peculiar type of Jeremy Corbyn supporter, the answer is, we've got an even better one. But the assembled Jewish community of Britain, with a couple of tiny exceptions, disagree. So you don't get to say ours is better if the people it's designed to protect think it's worse. It also dodges that Macpherson definition of racism, doesn't it? Which is if the person on the receiving end of the abuse believes that the abuse is racist, then you take that belief very seriously. It's not decided externally. That's a little trickier to impose. But why would the Labour Party be anything other than on the same page as at least the Conservative Party when it comes to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism? Think of it like that, if you are cross with me already. Why can't the Labour Party just accept the same definition of anti-Semitism that the Liberal Democrats accept? Or the Green Party? Or the Conservatives? You know, it's not a question of rights and wrongs. It's just a why. Why can't they do what every other organisation in the country has done and just accept this? Answer, because they need to keep alive the idea that there is some sort of Zionist conspiracy in place that is designed to manipulate and manage the news. And their evidence for that belief is the perceived imbalance of coverage for the plight of Palestinian people. Indeed, my earlier caller, seeking to sort of compare the suffering of Israelis with the suffering of Palestinians. You just can't do that numerically. I mean, you know, for me, an injured baby is as heartbreaking on one side of a wall as it is on the other side of a wall. But you can't numerically claim that the suffering of Israeli people has been in any way comparable to the suffering of Palestinian people. But now a lot of Israeli supporters will be cross with me, despite the fact that I'm criticising the Labour Party for its attitude to anti-Semitism. So I do understand what the minefield is and what it feels like, but I don't understand, without my own analysis of needing this Zionist narrative in order to undermine news coverage, I don't understand why the Labour Party can't just go along with everybody else. Paul's in Hendon. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks. I just want to say I really enjoy your show.
Thank you. You're very kind. We'll soon fix it.
Yeah, there's no conspiracy there. I just wanted to mention that. I just think that the Labour Party, the people who've taken over the Labour Party, and we can see this with the whole momentum thing, is that it's in their DNA, that it's an article of faith, that they kind of espouse a communist worldview. And that worldview, it's not about gaining votes, it's just being loyal to their core supporters. They can't possibly espouse a position which is pro-Israel. It has to be anti-Israel, and that's a complicated question, because Israel is, you know, historically capitalistic and right-wing, and that goes against the kind of Bolshevik roots that the Marxist leaders of the Labour Party.
Hang on, the Bolshevik roots are Jewish.
That's one of the great
Karl
ironies.
Marx was Jewish.
Well, that's one of the great ironies.
It's not an irony. I don't buy the idea that the Labour Party is inherently communistic and that Israel is inherently right-wing. The Israeli Labour Party has been a great force for good.
No, but that's true. But communist Russia...
A communist is Jewish. It's a Jewish invention.
It is a Jewish invention, but it was still illegal to practice Judaism in communist Russia. So it might have started off as a Jewish invention.
Not under Das Kapital, not under the central tenets of Marxism. I think you're going to struggle with this for the very simple reason that communism is a Jewish invention.
But in a sense, so is Christianity, and so is Jesus was Jewish. I mean, you could argue the same sort of thing.
But you haven't rung in to tell me that the Labour Party is diametrically opposed to Christianity because.
Sorry, I didn't want to digress into Christianity.
No, well, look, I reject the idea that the Labour Party is inherently communist. So does almost every Labour voter in the country.
But I think it's
But it is inherently Jewish.
But when it comes to the conflict between Jewish and capitalistic, and Jews are perceived by the Labour Party as capitalistic.
You just said yourself that Israel was profoundly capitalistic. That's not a Labour Party perception. That's your opinion.
Well, it is more.
So why? Let's just
historically, it hasn't been capitalistic, but it is quite capitalistic now.
So is the United Kingdom.
It wasn't a criticism. It was just really a statement.
No, but it was a blind alley that I'm going to rescue you from, and I'm going to invite you to tell me why you think because it doesn't have anything to do with economic models, I don't think, with respect. It's much subtler than that. Why would Jeremy Corbyn not just say, or why would the NEC not just say, we're comfortable with all 4 points in the original definition of anti-Semitism? Their answer to that is because it prevents us from criticising Israel, and that's demonstrably not true. So what's in it for them beyond that simple observation?
I don't think logically there is anything in it for them, but my point is that it's so ingrained in their DNA.
Yeah, no, well, that's the point. That's the point I've very politely rejected. So it's why I asked you again. You can't have something ingrained in your DNA. I mean, because then you're accusing them of prejudice, which is what you've rung in to criticise them for doing.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that.
And you don't think that you don't think a belief that's ingrained in someone's DNA is the same as an anti-Semitic accusation?
No, it could be if it's a racist. If they have a racist opinion, which has become
ingrained in their DNA,
ingrained in them, it doesn't make me a racist to call it out.
Right, not a racist. No, but you're accusing them of a prejudice that's identical to racism. I would never say that Jewish people have it ingrained in their DNA that X, Y, or Z. So for you to say that Labour supporters have it ingrained in their DNA for X, Y, or Z is actually just as problematic. Luke's in Manchester. Luke, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Really enjoying this show.
You don't have to say that, you know.
I know,
let's just take it as a presumption. Let's take it as read.
A few issues with the last caller, but if we've got time, I'll get to that. I'm quite fuming, to be honest. Like at this point, where the Conservatives are at like the weakest point they could possibly be at, why you wouldn't come out and just say, yeah, we agree with these 4 points. I feel like the reason why is it's become quite trendy for some Liberals. I mean, I'm a Labour voter myself, but it's come quite trendy for some Liberals to be extremely pro-Palestine. So I think any time they'll do something like this, it appeals to some of these voters. I mean, you see a lot of these people, when I go into Piccadilly Gardens in the city centre, you can see a lot of people who attend pro-Palestine rallies and things in the city centre.
But I mean, you can feel, or you can say, I think this is part of the problem. It's to do with the scale of complaint and objection that you receive. And it's another one of those occasions where I have to recognise that 99.9% of the population don't have skin as thick as mine. You criticise Israel, you get bombarded in a way that is utterly, utterly incomparable to anything else in the British political discourse. You suggest that the Palestinian people suffer demonstrably and considerably more.
I agree. I agree with that.
And that may be to give a break to the people that you're cross with. Maybe they're just getting confused by that into thinking that the scale of complaint is a sort of bias on the part of the reporters.
No, I agree. I just think at this time, and I'm being quite cynical here, politically, I think at this point, you have to make strategic decisions if you're the Labour Party. And at this point, is this really the best thing to be doing when they're
who would be cross? That's the thing we don't understand, Luke. Who are the people that would be that really don't want to adopt the same definition of anti-Semitism that everybody else can live with? Who are they?
I just think it just confuses me, and I hate to say it, but it is some people, some of the people you describe, and people who are so pro-Corbyn they won't accept anything against them. They're the same people who want to say, oh, well, we agree with most of them, but just by not agreeing with a few of them, that shows that we're pro-Palestine. You can still agree with these definitions and still be stand up for the rights of the Palestinian people. You don't have to disagree with some of these things, but I think by doing this...
Here is a definition of anti-Semitism with which I'm supremely comfortable. Here is an Israeli policy with regard to the people of Palestine with which I'm supremely uncomfortable.
Exactly.
There you go. I did it. Why can't they?
What hurts me the most is, and for the last caller saying, oh, it's because, it's come a right, it's come, saying... he got quite confused because in America it's the opposite way around. It's a right-wing Zionist conspiracy. They're communists. The Jews are communists.
Yeah, I know.
If you listen to Infowars, it's the opposite rhetoric. It's that Israel is part of a Zionist conspiracy to turn the globe communist. I'm quite confused why sometimes it gets conflated the other way around.
It's the horseshoe theory, probably, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
I'm just really disappointed. This is the time where you need to be avoiding all things like this, and just.
Well, they should be focusing on stopping Brexit and winning the next general election. But I think at least the first of those two goals doesn't seem to be very high up on Jeremy Corbyn's to-do list. Let's just look very briefly because I'm late for the next break, and I like your the way you think. So you can't accuse Jews of being more loyal to Israel than their own country. That's fine. I mean, that is racist. If I get a tweet or a text that says, why don't you F off back to Ireland? I've only been to Ireland about 3 times in my life, including for a Boyzone concert. It's hardly what you'd call ingrained in my DNA. Why don't you F off back to Ireland? You hate Britain. That's racist, right? So if I say you love Israel more than you love Britain, that's racist. You say to me, actually, I do love Israel more than Britain. That's fine. There's no crime being committed there. But I can't tell you what you think about your nationality or your ethnicity. So why the hell have they got a problem with that? Why have they got a problem with not being allowed to describe Israel as a racist endeavour? I mean, that's an astonishing thing to object to. They're saying the entire existence of Israel is a racist endeavour.
It's absurd. This things like this can cost them the election.
Should be 20 points ahead, Luke. You know it better than I do, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. This is a time where anybody of any common sense in charge...
Just imagine a half-decent Labour leader.
Yeah.
You can imagine Ken Clarke leading the Labour Party to a 20-point lead in the polls at the moment, or Anna flipping Soubry. But Jeremy is currently at about 4 until the next one comes out. I like Luke in Manchester because he reminded us of what the business of politics is. The business of politics is power. Getting power should be the most important thing. And early in the days of Jeremy Corbyn, a lot of you told me that what you liked about him was the fact that he didn't appear to prioritise the pursuit of power. He was somehow cleaner or purer than that. And as the years of his leadership have passed, so the penny has dropped. It would appear that there's no point being in politics if you're not going to get power. You can do nothing in opposition. Or, as Jeremy Corbyn's currently proving, you can occasionally do even less than nothing in opposition. So if getting elected is crucial, why not just go for the definition of anti-Semitism that everybody else accepts, the definition laid down by the International Holocaust Remembrance Assembly? It's the question Luke wants as a Labour activist answered. It's the question I want as somebody who dreams of the day that we had an effective opposition in this country. But they won't go along with the universally accepted definition of anti-Semitism because they think that it prevents them from criticising Israel. Which is kind of what I say when racists ring in and tell me you can't say what you want in this country anymore. I say, well, go on, say it now. So just say it now. Do you remember the first time that happened? It's a bloke in Hounslow said, you can't say what... This is going back about 10 years. You can't say what you want anymore. I said, well, you can on this show. He said, all right, Hounslows full of Pakistanis and they all stink. And I thought, OK, mate, yeah. It's not that you can't say what you want to say anymore. It's just that when you do say it, everybody realises what you like and avoids you. You're not going to get sent to jail. People are just going to cross the road because they don't want to be near you. So what is it you think you can't say about Israel? Well, I'll tell you what you can't say under this definition of anti-Semitism. You can't say that they're Nazis. That seems reasonable to me. You could perhaps, and I'd have to double-check on this, you could describe an individual policy enshrined in law, like Jeff Sessions on the April the 6th, signing off on the caging of children who've been torn away from their children. You could describe that as being like the Nazis, but not saying America is like Nazi Germany. It clearly isn't. So what is it you think you can't say? You can't accuse Jews of being more loyal to Israel than their own country. Well, no, of course you can't, because that isn't your right to do that. You can't tell me where my loyalties lie. Only I know where my loyalties lie. You don't get to tell me, because if you get to tell me where my loyalties lie and then you get to judge me according to where you say my loyalties lie, I ending up getting lynched for a crime I've never committed. So you can't tell me that, and you can't tell me that. You can't call Israel a racist endeavour. It seems perfectly reasonable to me. You could accuse it of having racist policies. You could perhaps even use the word apartheid to describe some of those policies. Unfairly, many would argue, but you should still be able to say it. You can't accuse it of being a racist endeavour. What are the criticisms of Israel that you're not allowed to make? I'm tempted to make them, just in the interests of argument. Because otherwise, you're left with the conclusion that I shared with you at the outset. And that conclusion is the reason why they want to have room within their charter for positions that everybody else considers to be anti-Semitic is so that they can keep the narrative alive that the news is not to be trusted. Phil's in Gibraltar. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hey, everybody. I just want to say I'm a Labour Party member. I'm a member of Momentum. And honestly, this whole thing is just so cripplingly disappointing to me.
Isn't it?
I mean, it's just... Okay, my biggest problem with it is I've got friends who, left-wing activists and stuff. I don't believe they are anti-Semites.
No.
But some of the things they say are demonstrably anti-Semitic, and I think we need to move away from it. And the Nazi phrase is the key thing, and I think that phrase in general gets bandied around so much these days, it's almost losing meaning. The Nazis were a very specific set of people who, in the 1930s and the 1940s, went on an endeavour under the banner of National Socialism that resulted in the death of 10 million people in concentration camps. That's what the Nazis were.
Well, yeah, you know that I agree with you because what you've said is historically accurate, but the Nazis were also in power in 1933 when none of the stuff you've just described was happening, and they were still Nazis. So I'm a little uncomfortable when I'm told to stop making comparisons with the Nazis because there hasn't been a Holocaust yet. The point is the Nazis were on the march long before the Holocaust started, but that's a
sidetrack, but I don't think the Holocaust has its roots in 1933, but nonetheless...
Go on. Phone-in radio like you've never heard it before. Go on.
But no. What I would like to do is why can't the Labour Party just accept those four positions?
Well, you tell me. What would your mates say? What would your friends say?
Well, right. My honest, genuine belief, I think you've said it already, is that they want to have that ability to antagonise. You know, by calling someone who's defending Israel a Nazi, you're going for an emotive response. You're trying to evoke...
Or by calling someone who's critical of Jeremy Corbyn a Zionist shill. You also insulate yourself against objectivity and criticism.
Absolutely. And I think it's people on both sides are guilty of this, but you basically devalue the entire debate. So you're no longer having a discussion as to whether or not Israeli policy towards Palestinian people is incorrect.
It's existential. It becomes an existential argument, doesn't it?
It's I hate you, you hate me, let's shout at each other. And it ruins discourse in general. I think it's pervaded through almost all of discourse now.
How would we pin it?
You use the phrase, pick a side and start in your mud. And that's what's happening.
And we don't expect it to happen on the left in the way that we expect it to happen on the right, but that's probably just us being naive.
Well, that depends on how familiar you are with the left, to be honest.
Of course it does. But just briefly, I've kind of half forgotten what it was now, but that's a good sign. It means you got my little grey cells whirring away. What would they say if you said, why do you need to retain the right to call Israel a Nazi outfit, to call it a racist endeavour? Why do you need to retain? They would presumably at some point they'd have to answer because it's true, because I do believe it.
Okay, so let's assume that no one's willing to go on record and say that they genuinely believe the Israeli state is, analogous with the Nazis.
Yeah.
But I would say their argument, if they were to present it academically, would be that if you limit what we say here, then where's the next threshold down? What do you stop us from saying next, and what do you stop us from saying after that, and which step after that? But I think that's a fallacy of an argument, because nobody is saying that you can't come out and say that using disproportionate violence against people is wrong.
Yeah.
I'll say that on this radio. No one's going to come after me. I can come out and say shooting at protesters is bad. No one's going to come after me.
Yeah.
But if I start to compare that state to a state that went on a European-wide crusade against not just the Jews, but, you've got the Roma community. Sorry, I must use the racial slur on your radio station. I apologise. Roma communities, travelling communities, the disabled, Poles, everyone that was just non-Aryan was a victim of that crime. I don't want to at all marginalise how the Jews were, No.
I understand everything you're saying, and I understand why. But we're both left with this sort of bolus of either incomprehension or the reluctant conclusion that it is a sort of Corbynite version of fake news rhetoric.
I think it's some of the harder elements of momentum. Because at the end of the day, it's the NEC's decision, not Jeremy Corbyn's decision, not the Parliamentary Labour Party's decision, and not the Labour Party in general. It was the GEC. I mean, you might argue GEC is representative of the Labour Party, but NEC. So, but that's who it was that came up with this. Now, that does have a number of very, very hard left people who I've had disagreements with in the past when we've been out together. But, generally speaking, they're all right guys, their heart's in the right place. But there's just this obsession with Israel as being this...
And the media, am I right? Or is this where I've been down my own rabbit hole? Because for me, it's always, the word media always appears in this. It's not the old anti-Semitic trope of the Jews running the banks. It's the 21st century anti-Semitic trope of the Jews running the media, and that's why Jeremy Corbyn doesn't get hailed as the Messiah in every quarter, because the Jews run the media. I get a lot of that.
Well, no, because if that was true, then the majority of Jews don't agree. Well, actually,
it's again, we're back to doing it.
A lot of Jews don't agree with.
No,
maybe that does come into sort of it. I think that's a rubbish defence from the left. I think that's the same as Trump supporters saying the deep state and fake news, and like you say, to be able to try and discredit media organisations by saying, okay, forget the story, it's part of a
yes,
wider
well,
narrative.
it is, obviously it is, but from where I'm sitting, that is what happens, that is what is happening, and as we apply our sort of joint Occam's razors from both ends of the argument, you are left with the conclusion that either they're comfortable with it because although they know it's wrong, it suits them, or they believe that it's true, which is in many ways even worse.